Good morning. It's that time of year where in many countries, students and teachers are returning to school, and we rely on educators to foster a positive environment for children to learn and to grow. As we all know, their influence can extend far beyond classrooms. Teachers help to shape and support students' emotional health and their growth as individuals. Welcome to today's program. I'm your host, historian Edna Friedberg, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by my colleague and friend, Gretchen Skidmore. Gretchen is the Director of Education Initiatives at the museum and also was a classroom teacher herself for 8 years in North Carolina. Hi there, Gretchen.
Hi, Edna. It's so great to be here with you today. It's great to be thinking about this topic. I feel the excitement just from my years of teaching of what it's like to think about the first days of school, whether you're in the United States or other parts of the world, and just the first days and the promise of what the school year can bring. So I love that we can talk about this today.
Absolutely. And today, viewers will be sharing stories of teachers from 1940s Europe whose devotion to Jewish children during the Holocaust had long lasting and life changing impact and results. Please send your questions to Gretchen by posting them in the comment section, and we'll address as many of them during the course of the live show as we can. So, to begin, we're going to actually begin our show in a very hopeless place, in the Łódź ghetto in Poland after Nazi Germany had invaded the country, setting off World War II. Surrounded by barbed wire and police, tens of thousands of Jews were imprisoned there, many for months or even years. Many people died every single day due to deliberately caused starvation and disease. And yet, even in those conditions, there were teachers there who were committed to preparing their students, hoping there would be a future for them. Gretchen, can you please tell us about one special teacher who worked in the Łódź ghetto named Stella Rein?
Yes, what we know about Stella is that she had been actually a teacher for a decade before the German invasion. She was teaching German and Latin at a high school in her hometown in Łódź. But she and her two daughters, Wanda and Marta, were forced into the ghetto. And that was because they were Jewish, not long after the war started. And when she was there, she began thinking about how she could continue to create a school environment for students in the ghetto, for Jewish students in the ghetto. And she wanted to make it similar to what they had before the war, what they had experienced in their normal lives. And so she taught not only reading and math in the ghetto in the school, but she taught Polish culture. She taught Latin to them. They even had a choir where they, practiced on, I'm sure, a very out of tune piano. And all of this was happening despite really extreme hunger, terrible conditions, arbitrary violence, illness of the students. It was extraordinary circumstances, and really, I think also important to note that by coming to school, the students got one meal a day at least. And by continuing this and keeping this going, that might have been the difference between life and death at the time.
And Stella was so much more than a teacher. She was a leader and created a community. She had been a principal of a high school before the war in Łódź, and she was the principal of this high school in the ghetto. But for context, also want to make sure that people are aware that Stella's wasn't the only school in the Łódź or Łódź ghetto. You may be surprised to know that the German authorities initially permitted schools, a number of them in the ghetto, and around 15,000 students attended these schools, which, as Gretchen described, were lifelines, both physically, intellectually, and emotionally. We actually have some really beautiful testimony. Let's hear from one of Stella's students named Salamea Cape, who survived the Holocaust and decades later reflected back on how much the Łódź Ghetto High School shaped her life.
I have to mention the teachers there because really I think only one survived from all the teachers. And the director of the school, which was Mrs. Rein, Stella Rein. Now she was the director of the school in the ghetto. Absolutely wonderful person who had so much devotion to these children. And what is so unbelievable that in such a difficult conditions, where the line between life and death is nothing, and we are always hungry. Still, you are going to school. Still, are the teachers coming from these difficult, conditions, and you have to study, and you are learning, and it looks like it is no future. But still, you make believe that it will be a future for us.
It's such an incredible act of spiritual resistance and of sustenance of all kinds. And I'm struck by the contrast between the more commonly known and also more statistically common cases of teachers in Nazi Germany, so many of whom taught Nazi propaganda with enthusiasm, anti-Semitic propaganda, and used it as a place to make their Jewish students feel excluded, less than, and demonized. So really, really different. Gretchen, I'm going to pause for a second to give some shout outs and recognize where people are watching from. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today from Pocahontas, Arkansas, Oxford, Mississippi, St. Paul, Minnesota, and also even from Hawaii. We hope that you are in a safe place in Hawaii where classes can begin normally. We'd also like to greet our international viewers tuning in from Malta, Canada, Scotland, the Netherlands, which we will be speaking about later today in our show, and also Hungary. We're so glad to have you here. Now, Gretchen, we have a comment from a viewer named Patricia who writes that wonderful schools are often a refuge of hope in troubled times, and I'm so glad that Salamea learned thanks to her teachers. Salamea actually in another place where she's writing had referred to Stella's school as magical, but that magic did not last because life in the ghetto was, of course, incredibly precarious. And in fall 1941, the ghetto schools were closed in order to make space, physical space, for about 40,000 new arrivals, Jews who the Germans had just deported. How did Stella respond to losing her space?
Well, not surprisingly, given everything we've heard, she kept teaching. I find this incredible. There were sometimes, lessons that were delivered outside. Sometimes this images of this just are so moving. And then there were some that were done inside, maybe into the factory or inside the orphanage, the Jewish orphanage, the children's orphanage. So she found a way, and I just think about this in terms of her dedication, right? That it continued. And I think about all the teachers I used to work with and the teachers that we work with today at the museum. And this is such a powerful part of this profession, the dedication, right? Knowing that actions that are taken in classrooms can provide hope, as her students talked about, and they can be a real distraction from challenging circumstances around people. So she kept going, and it really made a difference.
And the way you're describing it, and it's just so clear that the community that she created, the classes transcended the classroom. As you had described, these children are witnessing on a daily basis starvation and death all around them. And even if school was outdoors, even if it looked nothing like what they remembered from before, it meant so much for them to gather and to learn together. And also there were adults who were investing in them. So did Stella Rein, did this wonderful principal, did she survive the war and the Holocaust?
It is unfortunate to have to say that in August 1944, Stella was deported to the killing center at Auschwitz, and her daughters as well. Only Wanda survived. But after the war, Salamea committed herself to her education and was actually able to bring together the former students of Stella. They had a reunion in 1991. And by that event, we know that, many of her students went on with learning in their lives after the war. Stella became a doctor. A lot of her other students, some of them became historians and writers and chemists and painters and different things. And just the fact that they had this gathering and that they were each coming to the microphone and talking about her impact on their lives and on their communities and in the way that they were able to move ahead in the world was really moving. Although Salamea actually was so overwhelmed at the event that she didn't speak publicly. But we have one or two sentences that I like to share with you, just that I think encapsulate what a lot of the students said. She wrote later, decades after the war, we remain bound by memories of our school and our teachers. In 1 year, they gave us yearning to read, to write, and to analyze the world around us. And it's just a little, you get a little choked up because we know how that was not easy for Stella, but we know her legacy is so long lasting because of what happened.
Absolutely. No, it brings tears to my eyes every time I hear the story. It's really resonating with our viewers. A viewer named Patricia writes that Salomea was a brave young girl who, like so many others, was forced to live in misery. I respect her strength and gusto for learning. And a man named Michael writes in to say that Salomea was a very noble person and her teacher was truly a hero. We also have a couple of questions. Gretchen, viewer named Goldie is asking, wonder if any of Stella's students that survived became teachers themselves.
Oh, I think they did. Yeah, actually that was mentioned in the testimonies of the people who came to the reunion. Some of them were teachers, actually. That's a great question.
Amazing. And another viewer named Ryan asks if they were sent to concentration camps. I can take that one.
Yeah.
Ryan, the vast majority of residents of the Łódź ghetto were deported elsewhere to other camps, but every individual story, the ways that they survived were different. Some were sent to killing centers and others to other locations. We also have a really lovely personal reflection. A woman named Irene is writing to say, I live in Israel. My late mother was a student of Stella Rein in the Łódź Ghetto School. Wow. Thank you, Irene, so much. I can imagine that you knew many of the students.
Oh my gosh.
You know that legacy lives on in you too. So thank you, Irene, so much. We hope to pay tribute to your mother as well today. Gretchen, let's turn to another story in a totally different part of Europe and a reminder to us that the Holocaust was carried out in very different ways depending on the context. This one is in the Netherlands in Western Europe, and it's unlike anything I've ever heard. The story of a young girl who not only was deprived of the chance to learn in a regular school, but to live out in the open. Please introduce us to Susie Grimbaum.
Yeah, she was living in the Netherlands in the 1930s, and she went to public school and openly was able to celebrate Jewish holidays. The transition for her came in the 1940 when the Germans invaded the Netherlands. The authorities began implementing anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish policies and ordinances, including the fact that Jews were no longer able to attend public school. This meant that she was looking for schooling and found it actually in a neighboring village. And that was a Jewish school just for Jewish students, but she was able to continue to go there until 1942 when it was then that ability of Jews to travel was ended.
Yeah, they were forbidden to leave their hometown, so there was no school.
Yep.
But that actually was the least of things because things took a terrible turn for Jews living in the Netherlands in the summer of 1942 when Germans and their collaborators began rounding up Jews there and deporting them to concentration camps and killing centers in Eastern Europe. How did Susie and her family manage to protect themselves, Gretchen?
Well, they went into hiding. Susie's father went into one location, and she and her mother found actually were hidden in on a farm by a family called the Hardemicks. And they actually had, a fairly large family, not a lot of food on the table, but were hiding Susie and her mother in a crawl space, kind of like a coffin above the top of the barn. This photograph is taken after the war when they're no longer confined there, but you can see they can't sit up. And so that went on for a while. And then they actually created a different hiding spot for them that was kind of like a crawl space. And this, again, not much room, but they could sit up. And they did not have any way of really coming and going. I think she only reported leaving there one time in the entire time she was there. They really kept it secret. what was amazing to me was that the two younger children who were the farmers' children didn't even know that they were there. So they were able to bring them some food, and they brought them a bucket to relieve themselves. But it was just a really, they called it a palace because it was so better than the other place, but it was a very, very difficult place to be.
Yeah, I remember reading some of the testimony from her, and she's describing how it was pitch dark most of the time, infested with mice. I myself, I'm claustrophobic. That just to me sounds like my worst nightmare, and it's hard to imagine an 11-year-old girl and her mother cramped in there for 2 years. The sense of humor that you mentioned and their ironic name for it, the palace, it also comes through in other ways because they found ways not just to survive, but to try to keep their sanity and to keep their minds alive. Tell us how they did that. What were some of the ways?
Well, in they were trying to look for ways to, I'm sure, pass the time, right? But it was about learning. And the farmer's daughter, there was one named Lida who would bring books if she could. So there were some children's books that she was able to learn to read with. One was in English, so they tried to learn some English. And there was also a magazine that they got their hands on, and they were able to work on her handwriting because she was thinking about something different. It was actually recipes, and they were transcribing recipes into this thing. It becomes like a diary because in the course of writing the recipes, she's interspersing what she can hear about in the short interactions that she has when people are there. So she kept on working on and thinking about learning, and that all got really better when it turns out that Lida becomes engaged to a man named Hermann Mingelbrink, and he lives a mile down the road. They're also hiding Jews, and he's a teacher, and he starts coming into the crawl space. And I find it incredible that we can hear her talk about that.
Yeah, let's actually listen to Susie describe the lengths that this local teacher, Herman, was willing to go to in order to continue to have her learn.
Since he was a school teacher, Mother said, couldn't he come in that hole with us once in a while? And since he also hit people, couldn't he come in the hole with us once in a while and teach Susie? Well, the daughter said she would ask, and the end result was he would come, perhaps as often as once a week after he finished his duties. He would come and crawl in the hole and did what he could to teach a 13-year-old, and that was very useful. Of course, he did not really have books, I don't think. I couldn't really do homework except a limited amount, but at least it provided some sort of stimulation.
What an absolutely breathtaking show of solidarity. In some ways, the teaching is almost the least of it, just that he's showing up week after week to come be with her in this cramped and hidden place and to show that he still thinks of her as a student, as someone who can grow.
No, I think that's right. I think that's what's so inspiring about educators, just more generally, that people I know, because they do provide this consistency, and they provide really the surround of an adult that's there, that's consistently thinking about them, and that can instill this love of learning and model that. And I think it sounds like he did all of that for her in these really, really challenging. He went above and beyond, even in this terrible environment.
Not only was it an unpleasant thing or awkward thing to do, but it was actually very dangerous for Herman to be doing. He was taking a risk, surrounded by Germans and their local collaborators. Every time he went there, he was taking a risk. He could have exposed them. Did he ever get caught? What about the family, the Hardeminks, who were hiding Susie and her mother? Were any of them ever uncovered?
So Herman was never caught. There was a raid at the farm at one point, and they were thinking that they were hiding Jews. And of course, there was a lot of commotion. The testimony says that at one point, one of the authorities, the gun went off, but no one was injured. the family managed to keep their composure despite all of this, and the fact the hiding of Susie and her mother was never revealed. And actually, Susie's father also survived. What's remarkable is we have an image of them years later in 1993. Israel's museum, the Yad Vashem, brought Herman and the Hardemick family together and honored them and the risks they took to save Jewish lives. And Susie was there. And so their bond and really just the incredible acts that were taken at the time really stood out and provided, I think, for a lot of people an inspiration.
Absolutely extraordinary. And viewers are writing in reaction. Susan says it's the strength of the human spirit that can endure anything. And another Patricia writes, what a wonderful example of bravery and commitment. Before we close, Gretchen, another viewer named Rick is asking, how can we apply the initiative and creativity of these teachers? What are some of your thoughts as an educator yourself? What do you take away from these stories and hope we can offer to other teachers and students and parents out there who may be watching?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, Edna, I think when we think about educators during the Holocaust, we think about those educators you mentioned in Germany who taught anti-Semitic, Nazi propaganda. But although today we've taken time to talk about really unusual stories, right? People who took actions that really provided hope and distraction and instilled learning in students in the worst of circumstances. I just think about all the teachers we work with at the museum, teachers who are teaching about the Holocaust, teachers who are dedicating themselves to education in this profession right now. They're so talented, they're so hardworking, and despite all challenges, they're really providing for us an inspiration about the importance of education, the importance of understanding history, the importance of remembering these lives, those that were saved and those that were lost. And we really just are so fortunate that we have so many people who are willing to work with our young people. And we want to thank all of them, and we want to have everyone do what they can to support this very challenging and important work.
Thank you, Gretchen. And we know that many dedicated teachers are watching today, including Darren Levine, who is a history teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. He teaches Holocaust history to over 200 students each year, like Lily and Jack, who we hope will see this program, not live, because we hope they're in class, but later. Gretchen, thank you for joining us today and sharing such moving stories.
Thank you, Edna. It was an honor.
We are very pleased to pay tribute to teachers like Stella Rein, like Herman, and so many others whose devotion to their students during the Holocaust never wavered. There is so much we can learn from their ingenuity, their creativity, and just their heart. We also really want to recognize teachers today who, despite a lot of difficulties, are helping their students learn and grow. And we wish everyone a wonderful new school year. Thank you for tuning in.